But they did not remain poor for long. In 1129, the Knights Templar began one of the most successful recruiting and fundraising campaigns in history. They appealed to noble families across Europe, those with land, fortune, or a son to dedicate to the cause.
Hugh de Payenne gives a speech at Troyes. St. Bernard of Clairvaux is there to back him up. And essentially, they're asking for donations, for money, for lands, for men, to help support the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem, which by this point is about 30 years old, but politically quite unstable.
Suddenly, with marginal publicity, they start to get grants of land in every part of Europe.
The King of Aragon, for instance, in his will, I think he died in around the early or mid-1130s, left large chunks of what we now know as Spain to the order. And all of a sudden they just have this, vast tracts of land. Again, this comes back to the idea that everybody, or at least most people, thought that they were a good thing. To have this, really crack squad of trained soldiers defending the Holy Land.
The Templars attracted some of the best trained and most fanatical fighters of the crusading period.
To become a Knight Templar, you had to be nobly born, of legitimate descent, and you already had to be a knight.
And you would have to give up all your property, your holdings, and things like that to the organization.
It was this kind of dedication that Bernard of Clairvaux had in mind when he wrote that a handful of righteous warriors could vanquish a seemingly overwhelming horde. In 1177, at the Battle of Montguisard, the Templars fulfilled that promise against the renowned Muslim leader Saladin.
In the Battle of Montguisard, Saladin had an immense army, and he was on his way to attacking Jerusalem.
Saladin, leading an army of more than 26,000 men, encountered the Crusader army of Baldwin IV, the Christian king of Jerusalem. Numbering only 500 knights plus supporting infantry, they were blockaded at Ascalon by Saladin's far larger force. Some 80 Templar knights rode to the rescue, only to be blocked by Saladin's men at Gaza. Seeing little threat from the paltry forces, Saladin literally turned his back on them and headed for Jerusalem. Along the way, he allowed his men one of the indulgences of war.
He allowed his troops to fan out across the desert and plunder and pillage various villages, which was the sport, if you will, of the time. And the troops got too thin. They were isolated from each other, they were more vulnerable, and it made the entire army more open to attack.
With Saladin's men otherwise engaged, the Templars joined the rest of the Crusaders at Ascalon. Together, their small force moved up the coast. Near Ramla, they ambushed Saladin's personal bodyguards, the fearsome Mamluks. With the remainder of his army scattered across the desert, Saladin had no reinforcements. He was forced to retreat back to Egypt. It was, as Bernard had foretold, victory is not dependent on a big army.
For the Crusaders, this just proved their belief that the small forces, under the right conditions, could prove victorious against a larger enemy.
It is this concept of the specially trained and especially ruthless elite force that has characterized the Knights Templar.
You had to be a skilled fighter who had been trained in fighting on horseback in heavy armor since the age of about 7 or 8 years. These boys were not amateurs. They were dedicated full-time professional soldiers, and the Knights Templar became, in effect, the first standing army since the fall of the Roman Empire.
Today, we might think of them as elite special forces, the Delta Force or the British SAS.
Donations of land and treasure to the new order ensured that the Knights Templar were among the best equipped Christian forces.
They would go into battle on a war horse. They were known as destriers, these very large horses, who would, even the horses were trained to fight. They would train the horse to kick and butt and bite.
They carried a large two-handled sword, usually a pommel sword, which could cut a man in half with one blow. They also carried battle axes, maces. They could wheel and turn at remarkable speed, and they were the equivalent of a modern tank battalion when they were fighting.
You've got a row of these guys charging at you, you turn around and run.
But it wasn't just their weapons or battle skills that made the Templars such a formidable enemy. In scrupulously secret initiation ceremonies, Templar recruits swore oaths of obedience and loyalty unto death.
They had a rule, and it was a cardinal rule. You did not even consider breaking the rule of ever leaving the battlefield until the Templar flag went down, which was probably at the very end, if at all. You did not leave.
Part of their vows were that they would never accept ransom, so if they were captured, they faced either execution or a lifetime of slavery. So there was nothing to surrender for. So they fought to the death.
Even great Islamic leaders like Saladin were afraid of them because they had a reputation of being suicidal. If they died in battle, they would go to heaven straight away. It was very much the same as sort of the holy war idea today. The Templars had the same mindset, really, as modern terrorists, to some extent. They would go into the field, and that would be it. They wouldn't care if they came out alive or not. They were quite a scary bunch, really.
This cult-like fanaticism, with its oaths and secrecy, made the Templars fearsome in battle, but it would later bring about their downfall.
The Templars were probably the most secret of secret societies.
And they held these strange initiation ceremonies at night.
We know almost nothing about what went on behind the closed doors of Templar presbyteries.
The Knights Templar originated in 1119 with just 9 noblemen. By the time they'd reached the pinnacle of their power in 1300, they numbered in the tens of thousands. There were Templar warriors in the east and a massive support system of civilian Templars in the west. Together, they constituted an empire unrivaled in medieval Europe, with riches beyond imagination and power without limit. Their rise had been meteoric. It began in 1128, just a decade after their founding, when the first Knights Templar returned to the west after 9 years in Jerusalem. With donations sparked by the patronage of France's revered cleric Bernard of Clairvaux, they quickly raised a fortune and an army at the front line of the war with Islam.
They were able to send 300 knights to the Holy Land within less than 8 months. Now, 300 knights possibly doesn't sound a lot, but with each knight there would have been a squire, there would have been horses, there were farriers, there were tradespeople and armourers to go with them, and all the transport had to be organised.
Fighting at the side of King Louis VII of France and England's Richard the Lionheart, the Knights Templar played a critical role in the Crusades. Some protected the headquarters in Jerusalem, others roamed Europe and the Middle East wherever the fighting took them. They served as relief forces or guarded the rear of the main Crusader armies. Often they were used as the battering ram to break the enemy's ranks. But from 1150 on, the Knights Templar no longer guarded the road to Jerusalem. They had found a better way to protect travelers along the route, an ingenious system that allowed pilgrims to travel without the cash and valuables that marked them out as targets.
Before anyone would leave for crusade, whether it was a pilgrim or a noble or a king, they often would leave their land deeds, their charters, their jewels, their family